Hello and welcome, everybody. Today we'll be covering the first segment in our alien abduction incident and encounter iceberg. I found this iceberg while scrolling through Reddit and thought it would make an interesting video since I hadn't heard of many of these incidents myself. Thanks to user Amoles260 for making this iceberg picture, and a link to the original will be down in the description. So let's just go ahead and start at the beginning with the more well-known encounters and work our way down towards the bottom with the more obscure stuff. Part 1, Tier 1, The Roswell Incident. Now, everyone has heard of the alien craft that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, but many more incidents and conspiracies over the years would lead to a lot of speculation and lead to the generalized name, the Roswell Incident. Although spawned from multiple events and rumors occurring in and around this small rural town, it originally began with the supposed crash of a flying saucer. Found out on a ranch, a public information officer, Walter Hott, issued a press release saying, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. This news was of course then spread all around the world, with local papers being bombarded with calls from all sorts of news agencies wanting comments. Within one day, this original headline would be redacted, and the paper posted a new headline saying, Army debunks Roswell flying disc as world simmers with excitement. It was announced that it was only a downed weather balloon carrying a radar target and not an alien spaceship. The rancher was also interviewed for the local paper, where he stated that he didn't believe the story of it being a weather balloon at all. This, however, would be one of the last comments he would make about this entire incident, oddly enough. Since then, people have speculated that not only did the government recover a flying saucer, but they also recovered the bodies of the aliens inside of it. These stories all vary greatly, but the saucer seemed to be made of an ultra-lightweight foil-type material. Although there's no evidence besides just hearsay, some people did report bodies that were said to be otherworldly. A member of the U.S. Air Force, Mr. Spouse, claims to have been there that day, saying, they took the bodies to a hangar, and there were 2 guards at each door with machine guns. Spouse would go on to make other comments, such as, my friend said he saw the bodies, and I believed him. And, I heard it so many times it had to be true. Spouse even mentioned that the officers had been walking around collecting the prints of the previous day's paper. Pictures came out with the second headline showing the local airbase officers holding the debris in front of a camera for all to see. With only small sticks, rubber strips, and foil being shown, it just didn't make sense to many people. How could that be the flying saucer that was reported? These pictures, along with the quickly changed narrative, did nothing but fuel the already raging news articles being released throughout the country. Could this all really be aliens? Or maybe some Soviet craft that was down? It was the beginning of the Cold War, after all. No one was sure what exactly went down that day, but many knew the government wasn't telling the truth. And this did actually turn out to be a government cover-up, as more details came out about this case in 1994, when much of a secret project was declassified for the public. Although it was not a weather balloon, it is now widely believed that the Roswell incident was caused by a crashed military balloon from a, at the time, top-secret Project Mogul. Right outside of Roswell, there is Alamogordo Airfield Base, which is known for performing classified tests and military research. Before the debris was found at the nearby ranch, the base had apparently let loose some balloons 150 miles away during the prior weeks. Said to be more of a squadron of balloons, Project Mogul was designed to be a remote detection device that would alert the US of Soviet nuclear tests. The project was a slight success, but was too expensive and can only be done in areas where the balloon could stay at the same relative altitude. In the beginning, they were constructed of lightweight sticks and strange foil-like material that matches the description on the pictures from 1947. However, later in this project, they would change this design. They would construct it larger and craft it out of less conspicuous materials. In the coming decades, the events at Roswell would inspire more and more conspiracy theories and lead to even more alien sightings, incidents, hoaxes, and strange happenings throughout the country. Even now, with declassified files available to everybody, many still believe the government is hiding something about this. It may have just been too long ago and has been too well covered up for anybody to ever know what really happened all those years ago out in the New Mexico desert. The Betty Andreasson case. Said to be one of the most detailed alien abduction stories, this event would start one of the first ever controversies in the UFO community. Being widely known as the Andreasson Affair, this event would be documented and researched and written about for decades to come. Back in 1967 in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, it was a chilly January night with a heavy mist floating around the area. Betty Andreasson's parents were visiting her and her 7 children, while her husband James was recovering in the hospital from a car accident. The children were sitting in the living room talking and enjoying the company of their grandparents while Betty was cleaning the house. But then suddenly, the lights started to flicker, and then they all went out at once. Out of the pitch dark, a red light shined through the back window of their house, right where Betty happened to be cleaning up after dinner. Everybody got up and gathered in Betty's kitchen to investigate just what exactly was happening. Out of curiosity, Betty's father gazed out the back window into the backyard. Shrouded in a fog and a pinkish red light, he would go on to describe the creatures he saw approaching the door as little Halloween-like entities. He also said they appeared to be, quote, short gray humanoids with large pear-shaped heads and wide eyes, and these beings were moving towards them in sort of hopping motion. Although shocked and confused, the family somehow went back to what they were doing and then later went to bed and just slept perfectly fine until the next morning, or so they thought at the time. No other UFO activity was reported in the area at that time, and their neighbors didn't seem to notice anything either. This has largely been attributed to the dense fog covering the Ashburnham area, and this prevented the flashing lights and the red shine from being seen from anybody else in the area. Although overcome with a feeling that something just wasn't right, everything seemed to be back to normal for Betty and her family. The Andreassons moved on with their life and went back to their routine. This was the case until a few weeks later when Betty started to get visions of a strange and terrifying environment with odd human-like entities. She would continue having these small flashbacks that night, but they gradually faded from her memory. Then in 1975, an article written by Dr. Hynek would get her attention. He was asking for people with UFO experience and asked for them to come forward for a study. Seeing this article caused many memories to resurface for Betty. She contacted them, but it wasn't until 1977 that a mutual UFO network, or MUFON investigator, Jules Valancourt, was put on the case. After some interviews with Betty and her daughter Becky, Valancourt decided to put Betty under hypnosis with the help of Dr. Harold J. Eldenstein. This was to see if they could possibly recover some of her lost memories from that night over 10 years ago. And this seemingly worked because while undergoing hypnosis, Betty was able to recall most, if not all, of the events that happened during that long ago January night. Betty would recall that after her father looked out that back window, the entire family was put into a sort of stasis and paralyzed on the spot. This was when those little gray humanoid men, or goblins as they called it, entered their house through a still closed back door in the kitchen. These beings then took Betty and Becky out of suspended animation and took them straight through that closed back door. They then floated across the backyard and went aboard their spaceship. On board this alien craft, described as a large, disc-shaped object, Betty Andreasson stated that she was run through a series of physical and spiritual tests. These physical tests included probes in various parts of her body, and a surgery where some small unknown object was removed from her nostril with a large needle. She then states that she had a spiritual experience in which she saw angelic beings or even God, before she realized that they were not biological in nature and were just beyond her understanding. Conversing telepathically, the little gray men told Betty and her family that they would remain unharmed and they shouldn't worry. They continued by telling her that they wanted to exchange books with her and that the humans need to study nature and learn to live alongside it. They also said that we need to rid ourselves of our destructive tendencies. She apparently gave them her first Bible that she had kept since elementary school, and in return they gave her a strange blue book. All while this was happening, her daughter Becky was to stand nearby and be a witness of this strange exchange between humans and aliens. Betty said that she had looked over the book for the first few days after the incident, but since had forgotten all about it over the years. Valancourt has commented on this, saying, "Having hard evidence like the blue book was a key to the case and something that intrigued Dr. Hynek, who put me on the case first. Betty was in the ship for almost 4 hours, and before leaving, the entities would give her one final speech. The humanoid beings began by telling her that she would forget most of what happened this night, and then they finished by telling her that these beings loved all of humanity and they had only come to help us." Andreasson was then able to draw the flying saucer for Valancourt, who later stated, "The detail of this spacecraft and the beings she drew under hypnosis were such that it really made me believe there was something to this." Valancourt also noted that, quote, Betty and her daughter were both given psychological stress evaluations by a detective who definitely believes what they are saying to be true. This study over Betty and her close encounters would go on to inspire the first of 4 books in a series, giving this case its name that we know today, the Andreasson Affair. And this odd and complex story would continue through the 80s, in which Betty detailed other alien encounters going all the way back to her childhood. Remarried and living in a different area, she even had her new husband undergo hypnosis. He is claimed to have an eerily similar extraterrestrial encounter, which he uncovered after hearing Betty's story. Both of them would continue to describe new and unknown experiences well into the 90s. Many UFO researchers have gone on record as believers in Betty's abduction story, but there's never been any actual proof provided. This leaves many skeptical of the entire event, making us wonder if it's even true. Some believe that this could just be a hypnosis fantasy created in our mind. The Barney and Betty Hill case. On a spontaneous road trip, this New Hampshire couple were enjoying a drive through the White Mountains. It was late at night, and soon they would come to see a bright light in the sky, which they at first thought was a shooting star. However, this star seemed to be traveling with them, so they pulled over to get a closer look. Stopped in a scenic picnic area, the couple got out their binoculars and looked up into the night sky. While looking through the binoculars, they had seen a craft in front of the moon. At first, he thought it could just be a large airplane, until the craft suddenly jerked downwards and headed straight in their direction. He would go on to say that the craft was flat as a pancake, had windows all around it, where he could see small gray beings staring back at them. They got back in their car and tried to drive away from the alien craft speeding towards them. It then descended right in front of the vehicle, causing Barney to come to a screeching stop right in the middle of the highway. Barney then exited the car and moved towards the flying object in front of them. Again, using his binoculars, he peered into the ship where he saw 8 to 11 humanoid figures. One figure stood still, staring straight back at him while communicating to him telepathically, "Stay where you are and keep looking." He would go on to describe these figures to be wearing black caps and glossy black uniforms. Telescoping red lights then extended on bat-wing-like fins on both sides and the bottom of the object. The object in the sky floated forward, silently approaching them. Barney and Betty quickly jumped in their car and continued on their drive home, trying to flee from the spacecraft. They arrived back at their house around 5 a.m., which was quite strange. Given the distance, they should have gotten home around 2 a.m. They had somehow lost time, and neither one of them could explain how this happened. Not only this, but their clothes were scuffed up, and the strap to their binoculars was somehow ripped. They also had odd impulses to examine their bodies, and immediately felt the need to take long showers. Betty would also find a strange pink powder on her dress, but she put it in the back of her closet and would forget about it for years to come. They would also find strange metallic circles on the trunk of their car, which would cause compass needles to spin rapidly. At first, the couple didn't seem to want to talk about the event and just went on with their lives. But soon after, Betty began having consecutive vivid dreams of that night, and she wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it even while awake. She began to tell people about the alien craft they saw that night, which ended up getting a lot of attention. Then a little while later, a psychiatrist who had heard of this encounter, Benjamin Simon, would suggest hypnosis to them to try to bring out some of these memories from their lost period of time. Barney, hoping this might put Betty at ease, agreed to Benjamin Simon's suggestion. While under hypnosis, Barney would go on to describe what he had seen that night, all while sobbing and acting very frightened. After stopping on the highway and communicating with those human-like beings in the ship, he became terrified and ran away, recalling that as he rushed back to the car, he had somehow torn the strap to his binoculars. Shortly after driving away from the UFO, Barney felt overwhelmingly compelled to pull over and drive into the woods. Down dirt road, the car began to stall as they came across 6 entities standing and waiting for them. 3 of these humanoid beings approached the vehicle and began to stare directly into Barney's eyes. Under hypnosis, Barney would make a statement saying, "Oh, those eyes, they're in my brain." And, "All I see are these eyes. I'm not even afraid that they're not connected to a body. They're just there. They're just up close to me, pressing against my eyes." Barney would say that it seemed that they communicated through thought transference, but he couldn't understand anything they were saying. To him, it just seemed like a bizarre, mumbling language that they would speak to each other. Betty also underwent hypnosis, and although it was slightly different from her dreams, it was a very similar story to what she had described before. Her accounts of the abduction and preceding events were consistent with Barney's recovered memories as well. The main difference between their stories is that she claimed that the leader humanoid had a conversation with her in English, but she did also hear the mumbling of the others. Afterwards, they went on to live normal lives, not hiding the incident, but not actively speaking about it either. However, they would talk to people if they asked about it, and they would go on to do the occasional interviews for UFO researchers. In 1966, The Interrupted Journey, written by John G. Fuller, became a fast hit. In his book, he would write about the entire case and also included some of the sketches Betty had made years earlier. One of these was a star map she had drawn, possibly showing an area of space that the aliens had come from. Just this one sketch was enough to spark its own debate among UFO researchers and astronomers alike. Astronomy magazine even carried a debate article about this case for almost a year, with Carl Sagan even getting involved, trying to show that without the lines drawn between the stars, the map didn't even resemble the real-life area. This debate would continue into the 90s until the European Hipparcos mission, which measured the distance to over 100,000 stars, debunked most of the theories surrounding this star map. One UFO expert named Robert Schaefer has been following this case since the 80s, even releasing 48 pages of archived documents related to the case in 2015. He has attributed the UFO sighting to driving while sleep-deprived and stressed. Locals in the area he spoke to even pointed out that an aircraft warning beacon could be seen on the horizon, appearing and disappearing at the same time as the Hills had described seeing the craft. This wouldn't be the only possible explanation that would be brought to light over the years. In a 1990s article entirely unpredisposed, written by Martin Kottmeyer, he would suggest that the memories recovered from hypnosis could have been influenced by a TV program. The Outer Limits, a science fiction anthology series, aired an episode, The Valerio Shield, just 2 weeks before Barney's first hypnosis session. The aliens in this episode had large black eyes, and one even says, "And all the universe, and all the unities beyond the universe, all who have eyes that speak." In 2012, an American author, Jason Calavito, would go on to show the similarities between the Hill case and other episodes of The Outer Limits, along with the Twilight Zone episode in which aliens were showing wearing shiny leather jackets. All of these episodes would air just weeks before the two would undergo hypnosis, and these TV shows could have been the subconscious inspirations for Barney and Betty's story. Today, some people believe that the Hill case could have just been a story the two came up with in frustration. Being an interracial couple back then wasn't easy, and both of them were tired of the slow progress of the civil rights movement. Some people think that the in-between color of the gray aliens described could be seen as the racial element of the story, and some others have said that this has been produced by their subconscious fears. A professor of sociology at California's Chapman University, Christopher Bader, said in one interview, "Look what those aliens were. A mixture of black and white. I find that very meaningful." The Barney and Betty Hill case was also said to be one of the first horror depictions of an alien encounter. Many believe that they were the first to ever claim to be abducted, and the first to ever describe gray aliens. Before this, aliens were normally portrayed as men in science fiction type suits, normally keeping their distance from us. Even to this day, some still believe the Hill story, but many scientists and researchers have their doubts about this case, with no hard evidence ever being put forth. Despite this, Barney continued to stick by his story until his death in 1969. Betty would also stick to her claim for the rest of her life, passing away in 2004. Thanks for watching, guys, and please leave a like and subscribe if you liked watching this video or listening to it in podcast form. Let me know what you think about these encounters down in the comments, and let me know of others I should cover in future videos. Part 2 will be out next week, so be sure to come back and check it out. This was Matt, and I want to believe.